My wife called me into her break room with a wicked smile. This is where we celebrate winners, not people like you. One colleague chuckled. Dude, your own wife just humiliated you. I raised my glass, tapped her phone, and watched her face drain. The outcome was her voice was calm. Too calm. You made it, she said, eyes scanning the room like she was already bored. Yeah, I replied. You said this was important. She smiled just barely, but it was the kind of smile people give when they're hiding something sharp behind their teeth. This is where we celebrate winners, she said, then let her eyes linger on me. Not people like you. One of her co-workers let out a laugh, half suppressed. Dude, your own wife just humiliated you. I didn't respond, just lifted my glass, walked over to where her phone lay screen down on the table, tapped it gently with the rim, and looked at her. She picked it up, and I watched everything drain from her face. She knew. She knew I knew. My name's Derek. I'm 42, I work in logistics, and I've lived in Seattle for the past 10 years. I've always been the kind of guy people describe as dependable, calm, predictable. I never really minded that. Predictable is safe. Predictable gets the bills paid, the garbage out on time, and the oil changed before the engine starts knocking. My wife Camille was the opposite. Ambitious, high energy, and always in motion. She managed a sales team for a luxury cosmetics brand and treated her career like it was a fast car with no brakes. That energy drew me in when we first met. She made everything feel like an opportunity. She could charm a room with 2 sentences and a half smile. When she picked me out at an industry conference and said I looked like someone who could use a little chaos in his life, I smiled back and said, I probably could. We got married 9 months later. At first, the differences between us balanced each other out. I grounded her. She pushed me. We were a team until we weren't. Over the years, her job started to take over everything. I understood the late nights at first. The pressure. The events she couldn't miss. I cooked dinner for one more night than I could count, left her plates covered in foil, and watched them go untouched when I threw them out the next morning. She got good at apologizing quick, charming apologies that were always just enough to keep me from pressing harder. But something shifted about 2 years ago. She became distant. Not just tired, emotionally locked up. Her phone was always on silent. She started taking it into the bathroom with her. When I reached for it once while it buzzed on the counter, she snatched it away like I was trying to access national security secrets. Then there were the work trips. At first, she'd call at night. Then the calls stopped. Texts came late, short, distracted. I told myself she was just stressed, that it would pass. The truth was, I didn't want to believe what I already knew. Until I saw the message. It popped up on her phone while she was sleeping next to me. A text preview. Just a name I didn't recognize and a single line. Can't wait for next time. You're incredible. My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen until it dimmed again. She stirred beside me, pulled the blanket up over her shoulder. I didn't say anything. Not that night. Not the next day. I needed to be sure. So I waited. Observed. Collected. It's not hard to track someone when they assume you're too boring to try. I bought a second phone. Mirrored hers. Every message, every photo, every calendar reminder started syncing to my cloud account. I saw it all unfold in real-time. Weekend trips that were regional manager meetups were really getaways with a man named Aiden. One of her colleagues. Her boss, technically. Married, just like her. With kids. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted to see how far she'd go. How deep the hole ran. She sent him pictures. Laughed about me in their chats. Called me steady little Derek. Like being dependable was a punchline. I didn't sleep much during those weeks. And then, out of nowhere, she invited me to a work party. Said it was a celebration for a record quarter. I hesitated. She insisted. You never come to my events. It's just one night, she said, like she was offering me some sort of prize. I said yes, and I knew I'd be walking into a trap. The break room was brightly lit, filled with co-workers who were dressed more for cocktails than KPIs. She was already holding a drink when I arrived, surrounded by people laughing at a joke I hadn't heard. She didn't come to greet me right away. Didn't even look surprised to see me. Eventually, she turned toward me, flashing that rehearsed smile. You made it, she said. You said this was important. She looked around, gave a mock toast to no one in particular, and said it. This is where we celebrate winners. Not people like you. That part wasn't meant for a crowd. It was just for me. Aimed straight at the center of my chest. Someone behind her snorted. Dude, your own wife just humiliated you. And I smiled. I lifted my champagne glass. Walked to where her phone sat on the counter. Tapped it gently. She didn't understand at first. Then the screen lit up. A new notification. From her own email account. Subject line. HR complaint with evidence urgent. She unlocked it, started reading. That's when I saw her face fall apart. The tension in her shoulders. The way her hands started to tremble. I didn't have to say a word. I had sent it all screenshots, dates, timelines, messages, photos to her HR department 3 hours earlier. Not out of revenge. Not to blow up her life. But because I was done playing the fool. I walked out before she could say anything. Camille was suspended within 48 hours. HR started a full review. Aiden, it turned out, had done this before with other subordinates. My evidence was enough to cost him his job. Camille's corporate dream evaporated in days. The divorce papers were already in the works by then. I didn't tell her, just handed them over when she came home to collect her things. She fought for the house, tried to argue that I had hampered her life. But the court saw the evidence. So did her company. I didn't make her choices for her. She moved out in a single afternoon. Didn't say goodbye, just slammed the door behind her. I stood in the silence afterward, unsure of what to feel. Relieved, devastated, empty, maybe all of it. I didn't clean out her side of the closet for a month. Everything she left behind just sat there. Expensive heels lined up like they were waiting for a runway. Silk blouses still carrying the faint trace of her perfume. I couldn't bring myself to move them. It wasn't love anymore, it was some strange kind of mourning. Not for her, but for the version of her I thought I knew. The life I thought I had. Friends reached out when the news started to make the rounds. The work crowd mostly kept their distance, maybe out of embarrassment, maybe because Camille had spent years painting me as some dull, invisible man they barely remembered existed. But my brother called. My old college roommate sent me a long email about going through something similar years ago and how he'd come out better on the other side. Even my mother, who had always adored Camille, didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "Take your time, Derek." The house felt unfamiliar, like it had been staged for a life I wasn't living anymore. Camille had touched every surface of it. Every piece of furniture had her stamp. The framed abstract art, the marble coasters, the glass jars with decorative moss in the entryway that I never really understood. I didn't even try to reclaim it all at once. I started with small things. Swapped out the bedding. Donated the fancy wine glasses we never really used. Took down the framed quote in the hallway that read, "Hustle and heart will set you apart." It always sounded like a threat, in retrospect. One day, I took a walk into a local shelter and walked out with a scruffy shepherd mix they named Boomer. He was a little anxious, a little wild-eyed, and maybe that's why we got along immediately. He didn't judge me for my silence. He didn't expect anything of me except food, water, and the occasional thrown tennis ball. He slept beside the bed the first night like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was weeks before I could even begin to understand how much of myself I'd lost in that marriage. I didn't realize how many of my routines revolved around keeping Camille happy, or at least not unhappy. I'd wake up early just to move my calls around, cook her meals she'd forget to eat, skip social things she never wanted to attend. I'd made myself smaller over the years without even noticing. It's not something that hits you all at once. It sinks in like water into what's slow, invisible, and damaging. I started going to therapy. I didn't love the idea at first, but my brother nudged me into it. The first few sessions, I sat there with my arms crossed, telling the therapist I was fine, while she nodded patiently like she knew I was full of it. Then one day, I said it out loud. I think I was just something she tolerated. And that's when it cracked. That line came from somewhere deep. Somewhere buried under years of being overlooked, minimized, ignored. Once it came out, more followed. I talked about the early days of the relationship, how loved I felt, how that love slowly turned into performance, how I kept adjusting my personality around her moods like it was some kind of emotional choreography, how I told myself it was just a rough patch, just stress, just temporary. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true. Camille never reached out after the divorce was finalized. Not once. Not even to ask about the fallout from HR. I don't know if that was guilt, shame, or just her ability to compartmentalize things she didn't want to feel. She always was good at cutting clean lines through messy situations. For a while, I checked her socials. Just curiosity. She posted less. Eventually, her profiles went private. Maybe she was starting over. Maybe she just didn't want reminders of who she used to be. I didn't care. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But if I'm being honest, there were nights I'd wonder if she ever thought about me. About how she'd taken someone who loved her and turned him into a punchline at a breakroom party. The anger came in waves. Sometimes it was sharp, white-hot, rising without warning at the sight of something ordinary, like one of her favorite candles I hadn't thrown out yet. Other times it was a quiet kind of ache, the dull realization that the person you built a life with didn't really see you as a person at all by the end. Still, the space started to feel more like mine. I bought a used armchair I'd always wanted, dark leather, deep seat, perfect for reading in the evenings. I moved her desk out of the home office and turned the room into a small studio for hobbies I'd forgotten I had: woodworking, puzzles, music. Sometimes I caught myself laughing again. Real laughter. The kind that comes from your stomach, not your throat. Boomer would tilt his head every time, like he didn't quite know what to make of it. And then, out of nowhere, came a message. Not from Camille. From someone I barely remembered. Her name was Isabel. She'd worked under Camille a couple years back. Quiet woman, always polite at events. I remembered her once bringing lemon shortbread to a work barbecue, and Camille mocked it later, saying it was a bit of a school cafeteria. I like them. 8-4. Her message was simple. Hi Derek. I don't mean to overstep, I'm not really sure if this is appropriate. But I wanted to say I heard what happened. And I'm really sorry. I always thought you seemed kind. I hope you're doing okay. That was it. I stared at it for longer than I care to admit. I wasn't used to people reaching out just to be kind. No agenda. No gossip. Just human decency. I replied, cautiously, just a thank you. But it turned into a conversation. Then another. Then a coffee meetup a few weeks later. She didn't ask for details. Didn't pry. She just sat across from me with a mug between her hands and asked how I was holding up. Not what happened. Not what's the gossip. Just, how are you really doing? And I told her, not everything. Not at first. But more than I expected to. She listened. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't auditioning for someone's attention. I wasn't trying to impress her. I didn't need to earn my space. I could just be. We didn't rush into anything. That's the part people always seem surprised by when I tell them. There was no whirlwind romance, no dramatic declarations, no kissing in the rain outside a coffee shop. There was just space. A kind of gentle, steady unfolding. Isabel and I started meeting every week or two. Always somewhere low-key. A bookstore cafe in Fremont. A walk along Green Lake with Boomer. Once, at a farmer's market where we stood in the rain, both pretending we weren't soaking wet while she insisted the strawberries were worth it. She was thoughtful in ways that snuck up on me. She remembered little things, how I liked my coffee, that I preferred crisp apples to soft ones, that I never remembered to carry an umbrella. She never made those things feel like a performance. She just noticed. She cared. At first, I felt guilty for enjoying her company. It's not that I wanted Camille back, not by any stretch, but something about feeling close to another woman stirred up this weird echo of shame. Like I was betraying someone. Like I wasn't allowed to laugh with someone else yet. It made no sense, even to me. I brought it up once, kind of awkwardly. We were sitting on a park bench. Boomer was trying to roll in something that definitely wasn't clean. I said, sometimes I feel like I'm doing something wrong just by being here. Isabel didn't look surprised. She just tilted her head slightly and said, you spent years carrying someone else's weight. It makes sense that putting it down feels strange. And then she reached over not to grab my hand, but just to lightly rest hers beside mine on the bench. Not touching, just there. It was the first time I felt what it meant to be seen without being evaluated. Camille had love potential. She loved ambition, plans, and performance. I had to constantly become something for her to be satisfied. More impressive, more successful, more on brand. With Isabel, I didn't need to be anything other than who I already was. We didn't call it dating for a while. It just wasn't that kind of story. It was slow, patient, real. There were quiet Sundays spent reorganizing my garage. Dinners where we took turns cooking and laughing when we burned the rice. Nights on the couch with a movie neither of us were really watching because we'd paused it 3 times to keep talking. Eventually, it became something we didn't need to define out loud. It just was. Camille made contact again about 9 months after the divorce. It came as a short email. No subject line. Just a few lines. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for the way I treated you for so long. I see it now. I hope you're doing well. I sat with that email open for half an hour before closing the tab. I didn't reply. It didn't make me angry. It didn't make me feel anything at all, really. Just a dull, passing acknowledgement that people sometimes need to offload their guilt when it finally catches up with them. I wasn't going to help her feel better about what she did. That wasn't my job anymore. I mentioned the email to Isabel that weekend not for advice, just to say it out loud and get it out of my head. She didn't flinch, just nodded and said, makes sense. She's trying to patch a hole that can't be patched. That was it. No jealousy, no interrogation, just understanding. I think that moment sealed something quietly between us. We didn't say it out loud, but it was like we both knew this was a different kind of relationship than either of us had before. Built on stillness, not spectacle. A year passed. Isabel eventually brought over a small drawer of things, just toothbrushes, tea bags she liked, and a couple of books she refused to lend out. She never moved in officially, but it stopped feeling like just my house. We painted one of the spare rooms together. She planted a herb garden in the back that somehow didn't die under my care. Boomer adored her. We traveled once. Just a short trip to Victoria on the ferry. Stayed in a quiet inn. Woke up late. Ate too much. Talked about everything and nothing. It was the most peaceful I'd felt in a decade. And somewhere along the line, I stopped thinking of myself as a man recovering from a betrayal. I was just Derek again. Not someone's husband. Not someone's disappointment. Just me. And I liked who that guy was becoming. It's strange how peace can sneak up on you. One morning, I woke up to the sound of Boomer's nails clicking across the hardwood and realized I hadn't thought about Camille in weeks. Not in anger. Not in sadness. Not even in curiosity. She was just background noise. A past life that no longer played on a loop. I'd spent so long bracing for pain that it felt odd to finally be living without it. Healing, I learned, doesn't show up with a big announcement. It arrives quietly, in moments you almost miss. Like realizing your heart isn't pounding when your phone buzzes. Or noticing you haven't checked your ex's profile in months. Or walking into your own home and thinking, yeah, this feels like mine now. That said, life doesn't tie things up neatly. It has a way of circling back, just when you've stopped looking over your shoulder. I was at a community fundraiser, a small one, local vendors, nothing corporate. Isabel had roped me into volunteering. She was managing the donations table, her face flushed from the wind, wearing that wool scarf she always claimed was too itchy, but never stopped wearing. I was refilling coffee carafes and making awkward conversations with people I'd probably never see again. And then I saw her, Camille, across the park, holding a clipboard, talking to one of the event organizers. It took me a second to recognize her. Her hair was shorter, no heels, dressed in flats and a long, neutral coat. She looked ordinary. That's not an insult, it's just that. For years, Camille had gone out of her way to be seen. Bright colors, loud accessories, statement pieces. That day, she looked like someone blending in. I turned back toward the table, heart ticking a little faster, not from longing or fear, but from the sheer weight of recognition. Seeing someone in a new light after years of distortion. Isabel noticed. She followed my eyes, then looked back at me. That her? She asked softly. Yeah, I said. She nodded once, without drama. No possessiveness. No threat in her voice. Just curiosity, followed by quiet reassurance. You want me to take over here for a bit? I shook my head. No, I'm okay. And I was. Really. Camille noticed me eventually. I felt her pause. The way her energy shifted when she turned. Her eyes met mine for half a second, enough for something to flicker across her face. Recognition. Hesitation. Maybe regret. Or maybe just surprise. She didn't approach. Neither did I. There wasn't anything left to say. Later, I found out through someone else that she was working for a local nonprofit now. A career shift after the impropriety. Rebranding, probably. Or maybe she was genuinely trying to change. I don't know. I don't care to know. That moment in the park? That was enough. It felt like closure, though no words were spoken. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a small, ordinary event, no longer orbiting each other. No longer clinging to what they used to be. Isabel and I went home that evening and didn't talk about it much. She didn't need details. She just rested her head on my shoulder later while we watched a documentary about birds, and I thought, this is what security feels like. Not fireworks. Not adrenaline. Just stillness. Trust. The kind that doesn't demand explanation. A few months after that run-in at the fundraiser, I got an email from an old mutual friend, Jared, a guy from Camille's company who'd left not long after she did. He'd kept in light contact with both of us over the years. Harmless guy, always stayed neutral. The kind of person who makes it a point to never take sides, even when there clearly is one. His message was short. Hey man, long time. Just wanted to give you a heads up, Camille's trying to get back into corporate. Apparently she's trying to land a consulting gig at the logistics firm you work with. Thought you might want to know, in case they ask around. At first, I read it twice just to be sure I understood. I didn't respond right away, but then I smiled. And for the first time in years, the part of me that had quietly simmered, who'd endured the humiliation, the betrayal, the shrink-wrapped politeness, felt something close to justice stirring. Camille, after years of burning bridges, wanted back in. And fate had handed me the matchbook. My current company has grown in the last year. I'd taken on more responsibility, moved into a mid-senior role quietly, without fanfare. We had recently started outsourcing parts of our supply chain process, and were exploring bringing in outside consultants for some strategic contracts. Camille must have caught wind of that through someone. I didn't try to block her. I didn't badmouth her. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I waited. And then I offered to sit in on the interviews. I didn't tell anyone about our history. Not right away. Not until she walked into the room, portfolio in hand, confidence clearly rehearsed, and saw me seated at the far end of the table with the others. The shift in her face wasn't dramatic. It was just a flicker, the kind of subtle panic people try to hide with forced professionalism. But I saw it. That flash of oh no. That moment, she realized the ground beneath her was not as solid as she thought. She held her smile, sat down, launched into her pitch. I listened, took notes, asked a few neutral, professional questions. The others nodded along, impressed by her delivery. Then someone said, Derek, you've worked on the kind of vendor partnerships she's talking about. Any thoughts? I nodded slowly. Well, I said, measured. Camille definitely knows how to present herself. She's polished, knows the lingo. But I've worked in this sector for a long time, and what we need right now is someone who builds strong, long-term partnerships. Someone who understands loyalty, accountability, and how to own a mistake when things go sideways. I let the words hang in the air for just a beat too long. Camille didn't flinch, but she didn't meet my eyes, either. I'm not sure she's the best fit for that kind of culture, I said. But that's just my take. Nobody pushed back. The meeting ended soon after. A week later, I heard through the grapevine that her name had been taken off the shortlist. I didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. But when I got home that night, and Isabel handed me a glass of wine and asked how my day went, I smiled in a way I hadn't in a long time. Quiet, I said, but productive. She smirked, not needing any more than that. Some people think revenge has to be loud. I don't. Revenge can be a silent refusal to give someone access to your peace. It can be choosing not to speak poorly of someone who would have sold your dignity for a promotion. It can be living a life so steady, so full, that the people who tried to tear you down are forced to watch you rise without them. Camille once stood in a room full of her colleagues and belittled me like I was furniture, a prop in her performance. Now she sits on the outside of a world I've rebuilt without her. A world where I'm respected, where I'm loved, where I'm no longer afraid of being seen, because I finally know I'm worth seeing. Isabel and I just bought tickets for a long weekend in Banff. The same place Camille and I always said we'd go, but never did. Too busy, too expensive, too many excuses. Isabel found the place. Cozy lodge. Dog-friendly. Firewood included. We're not trying to prove anything. We're just living the life I used to beg for in a marriage where I wasn't heard. Sometimes revenge doesn't come in explosions. Sometimes it comes in peace. And that, I've learned, is more than enough.